His extensive background includes directing a similar center at the University of North Texas. Well, now I do have a football. Yeah, that coach is on the list of people Tech's considering as our next football coach. Anyway, and that's where UVA's quarterback came from. See, Scott? I'm ready for the podcast, buddy. I'm just warming up. Anyway, he spent nearly a decade of private sector experience in transportation and logistics. In 2025, Northern Virginia Magazine recognized his impact by naming him one of the region's 50 most influential people. He's a leading expert in economic development, regional economics, and forecasting. Dr. Clower has authored or co-authored over 300 publications, including the textbook Globalization, Planning, and Local Economic Development. His diverse academic background includes a master's in applied economics and PhD in information sciences from the University of North Texas, along with a bachelor's degree from Texas A&M University, a wonderful land-grant school. I might add. Well, you paid the last one a lot, but anyway, that's another story. Importantly for this audience, he is a resident of Stafford County. So very, very familiar with the region, and we're very happy to have you with us, Dr. Clower.
All right, yeah, I'm going to let Rose do everything, because she's good at it. What we're going to do, I'm going to go through some slides, and good to see some friends here. But I do want to just say, look, I'm going to be talking through some data points, and I think let's have a conversation. This is almost the perfect size group, so if you have a question, don't feel like you have to wait till the end, throw your hand up, let me know, shout out, do something or another. And of course but I will tell you it's being recorded, so whatever you ask, it will be there. I'm fortunate, I'm a tenured full professor, so there's a lot of things that I can get away with. Not as much as I used to, but we can have some fun with this. But I want to talk a little bit about setting some stage about where we are as a broader region. If we look at the DMV overall, we are certainly going through some shocks to the system. We've lost about, as through August, which of course that was as of August, doesn't include all the stuff that happened at the end of September, about 35,000 federal jobs in the region. Keep in mind that even if you don't count contracting and all that, every one of those jobs will represent another 0.4 jobs in the economy just because of their household spending. So we're seeing some significant shocks that are happening. Obviously not distributed equal. The district has been hammered a little more than others. What is really interesting that's a little counter to some of the narrative that we've had going on is that if you look at, for this year, January through August, again, our latest data that we have, Maryland has actually, in percentage terms, grown faster than Virginia. But what I can tell you, it's not Montgomery County. But there are some real challenges. In fact, this will be the first time that I've done that where it's been recorded. I will tell you that the core region of the Washington, D.C. area has not faced an economic threat of this magnitude since the British were sailing up the Potomac River in October of 1814. It's really, they're not used to it. Do I know?
Is that what happened to the East one?
Please. All I think about is I'm enough of an economist to actually believe that you need to pay your bills, and we don't seem to have any parties that are interested in paying bills anymore, so I don't know. But in any case, but what I want to do is talk about opportunity, but let me do this. This is not an Agatha Christie novel where we're going to have a surprise ending or anything. The fact of the matter is, this region, my home region now, has an unprecedented opportunity for moving forward and being the center of growth in a diverse, structurally sound economy that is going to succeed for the mid-21st century and beyond. You do have the opportunity to screw it up, but you are positioned better than I can think of any other place in the Commonwealth of Virginia and many other places on the entire mid-Atlantic coast. You are well positioned, and we're going to talk about some of those opportunities, But then I'm gonna kind of end, and I'm happy to take some feedback, I'm happy to take some flack on some things that it's gonna take if you're going to achieve your potential. And I'll just tell you that, again, even looking at the camera here, it's gonna require you doing things differently than your neighbors to the north. It's just gonna have to be different. And that's gonna make some people happy, and there's gonna be some people really honked off when you try to do it differently. So good luck with that and have fun. All right, let's just talk a little bit about some structure here. I bring this up, and you have some analyses going on, but where are the big employers? And there's a lot of data here. And by the way, Rose will have these slides available for distribution so you can look at it. And of course, if you want any other information, please always reach out to us. But there's some key pieces here. It's no surprise that government is the biggest employer here between the Dahlgren and some of the other activities. And then of course, local government is always a big employer, school districts and things like that. But there's a key piece here is what's growing, what is not growing, and then there's a column up there that says concentration. That's the thing we call location quotient, and it's just a very simple measure of if you look at the distribution of employment in a particular sector, the percentage it represents of total employment, how do you compare against the national average? So where do you seem to have some competitive advantage? Well, the government is obviously not a surprise to you. Retail trade, you have a little bit, and I would tell you that's a lot of the retail center concept of what Fredericksburg represents for a much broader area than just even the region itself, you know, because there are people who actually come out of suburban Northern Virginia to some of the retail trade opportunities that are in Fredericksburg. There's one, though, that I highlighted in green, and it's part of a narrative that I want to go through, professional business services. You have a slight advantage in that one, but not a big one. And I want to talk about that as being a potential advantage as we move forward. This is just meant to give you some general sense of, though, where you fit in structure of the economy. If I turn this into talking about the actual other types of jobs and just seeing what's been going on in other parts of the sectors, I'm sorry, that one didn't come out. I'm sorry, you got a duplicate in there. My apologies. There we go. Occupation characteristics. That's what I wanted to do. Just looking at this by occupations, and it's interesting, sales related, business financial operations actually growing very rapidly and becoming more advantageous, which is some of that professional business services, but it's pieces of it. You know, the good news there is you look at that top one, retail sales has certainly kind of flattened out. I wouldn't say, you know, the numbers are always a little bit of estimates, right? So I wouldn't say it's a big loss, but what you're seeing some growth in is higher wage, higher value added occupations. And this is where you as an economy are maturing. And that is, it's really good news. Management is growing a little bit, but if you'll notice down there, that would suggest that 0.88 says that you're generally still underrepresented in that area. So that creates some opportunities. And of course, with the pretty good wages on that, you know, the computer and mathematical stuff, particularly computer sciences stuff, one of the real challenges that we're having now in planning for the future and in education is this disruption of the AI technologies and how that's affecting some of the programming. Remember, the hottest thing to tell your kid to get into was computer programming 3 years ago. And now you have all this question about, you know, entry-level jobs and all of that. Of course, one of the things is Mark Zuckerberg was quoted back in spring talking about, you know, that, well, I'm not going to need mid-level software engineers anymore because AI can do it. And of course, you know, the question is, okay, brother, but where are you going to get a high-level software engineer if they don't become a mid-level at some point? There's a lot of stuff that's going on with the AI that's overhyped now. You saw the announcements this week about Amazon and others, you know, that they've already decided that AI is so good they can lay off a bunch of folks. I can't help that's not just a little bit like the same thing we saw with the companies doing the return to office that was just wanting to get people to quit so they didn't have to announce they were doing layoffs. By the way, I'll just observe that there was one of the big banks that was among the leaders of, oh, you have to have all your staff back in the office, you know you have to do. This was a big New York bank. If you'll go back and you look to, like, I think it was around 2018, that same CEO had a fight with his board about whether or not they lease space or own space in Manhattan. And he won, and they own all that space. So if I was sitting on a few $1 billion worth of assets that I was paying for anyhow, I might want people to be in it, right? Because otherwise I have to make, a mistake, I made a big mistake on that. Here's one of the things. And I certainly want to acknowledge that commuting, but if you look at, and I think this is just really kind of fun to look at, these are going to be somewhat estimates, and some of this, you have to admit, has to be talking about folks that have remote jobs, because I really do hate to think that if we go toward that bottom of the list, that there are almost 2,500 of our neighbors are commuting to Virginia Beach. Oh my God. Why? But, so there's a little bit, so I take it for what it is. But here's the key number. Thomas, I'm thinking about you, and it's just like, it's that bottom line number where you now have about 50,000 people commuting in from various counties. And notice that Fairfax County and Alexandria and Arlington don't appear on the top of these lists. It's some of the other outer suburbs. But you have 98,000 people commuting out. And this is the region. This is not just Stafford County or the region, right? Your opportunity here is that 47,000 people that would much rather have a job near home than going all the way up into Loudoun County or someplace like that. A little thing that I've been thinking about doing, and it kind of comes out, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but you think of some stuff. I've been thinking that we actually need to think in things of a commuting tolerance line. Where are you willing to live if you're going to the office 1 day a week? Where are you willing to live if it's 2 or 3 days a week? And if it's 4 or 5 days, where is it? And with this, calling people back to the office to justify whatever they're needing to justify with that, what does that do? And of course, our concern now is that for those that have decided, let's say, to move to Caroline County or in Spotsylvania and are having now to do that commute 5 days a week, they're not going to keep doing that commute. But do we keep them here, or do they decide to go to Charlotte or Orlando or Nashville or Dallas or someplace else? Because they're not going to move back in. If you just give you an idea, the median priced single family home in Arlington, including townhomes combined with detached homes, you have to have $200,000 a year to be able to afford the median value home. That is unaffordable. It is why Northern Virginia continues to see domestic out-migration, because it's simply unaffordable. And unfortunately, that domestic out-migration is our 30s and 40-somethings in family formation years. Now, our good news is some of them are stopping here in your region, but many of them are, some of them are stopping in Richmond, but many of them are going to the next state, 2 states away. And we need to stop that brain drain. Another way I want to look at it, and this gets into the way we do economic development strategies and planning, is I looked at some data that I have that considers what industries are you importing materials from. And what you see here is intermediate. Those of you that know, this is the kind of stuff that companies use. Institutional imports means that the purchaser is either government or households. Households counts as institution into these data, and then whether they're domestic or foreign imports. And what I really see is that #1 line. The biggest import sector you have are professional business services. That tells me, from an economic development perspective, that you have existing demand from companies that could be providing that service that are based here, as opposed to you importing that service. Now, you're not going to capture all of it, but it makes me wonder. We talk about logistics centers. The news is full of that. We obviously are talked to death about data centers. I just wonder if there's not someplace in your planning a real opportunity for office structures as well, as a part of commercial development and commercial opportunity, where you're saying you can attract workers. You have elements of quality of life, and you are affordable compared to many of the places. You want to be in Alexandria, to where you can do Old Town and you can hop on Metro and go do stuff in the district. That's great. It's kind of like what I always thought about was living above the bar. That was a lot of fun until you had a 4-year-old in town. And then all of that stuff that made it so special, you're thinking, is my kid safe going down the street to the park? Or can, do I actually have a yard that they can play in? That kind of thing. So I think there is some real opportunity to think about how you envision your built environment, that you are not simply, it's the opportunities for manufacturing, for logistics, for data centers are tremendous, but there are other opportunities as well that give you that balance, because no matter what you do, you want a balance. You don't want all your eggs in one basket kind of thing, right? And you don't need you don't need to be Loudoun County, for example. But the answer to being anti-Loudoun County is not to say no to everything. What do they call that? The banana, right? Build absolutely nothing, anywhere, anytime, whatever it is. Now, and somebody that I wanted to just notice here, here's a couple of things that I think are real interesting, and it's good that yellow came across. I would usually tell you that it's not a great color for slides or anything, but the vacancy rates that you've seen here have actually been going down. And this gets to that point that the office space that you do have seems to be, as a region, performing pretty well, and particularly compared to what's happening to the DC metro area overall. In fact, one of the great challenges now that they don't talk a little bit about is the strain on the tax base that is being faced by Arlington, Fairfax, and other. Arlington's at 22, 23% vacancy. Taylor, you may know some of these numbers better than I do. Fairfax is running about 19% vacancy rate, and that's starting to have some pressure. Now, trophy properties are doing fine, but you got a whole lot of stuff that's not trophy anymore. In fact, some of the stuff that was Class A just a few years ago is not considered really marketable Class A anymore. But what this tells me, again, from an economic opportunity, it seems like you have some real advantage. You've got demand for the office space you do have that is in excess of what can be explained by what's going on in the region overall. And does that mean that that creates opportunities for diverse property development? I'm not saying you go out and do a lot of spec building on it or anything, but I think that there's some opportunities there for you. The other one is, of course, what makes it advantageous is cost of doing business. And your rent levels are just going to be because of cost of land and everything else. I mean, you look at what cost of land in Loudoun or Prince William or Fairfax or any of that is, and you can provide a competitive product. And here's the difference. If I'm talking about government contractors to where 80–90% of their business or more is the federal government, I don't have to worry about as much cost because I just bid it up into the cost of the contracts. If I am in a business and I am competing with companies that are based in Dallas, Kansas City, Omaha, any place else, I have to have a competitive cost structure. This is part where in this region you have the much bigger opportunity for a competitive cost structure. And there are companies now that want to just be, if all they want to do is sell to federal government, God bless them, let them be wherever they want. I wish federal government was a little more business negotiation about whether or not what they're paying. That it's my dollars, right? Your dollars that are paying for it. But just think about those opportunities that you have there. Now, of course, we can't do anything without talking about residential sales. And of course, I follow the folks at the Fredericksburg Regional Association of Realtors, and they're great folks, and they monitor the data very carefully. But I thought it was really interesting to tell. We certainly are seeing across the entire metropolitan area a bit of an uptick in sales. We're seeing more inventory, but those inventories, and I'll talk about this in just a moment, but they're still pretty low. And you look at this over time, that big spike that you're seeing up there in 2022, we did see the folks, kind of, going away or doing whatever they were going to do during the pandemic and afterwards. But the spike that we've seen up now is still not a lot. Now, of course, if you have folks like me, I was fortunate. I moved to Stafford in the height of the pandemic, got my 2.75% 30-year fixed mortgage, and it will be my cold, dead, clawed hands ripping out of that 2.75% mortgage, right? I was just thinking, you know what I wish I'd really done, what I screwed up on was not negotiate to have an assumable mortgage, because my home value would be worth $100,000 more if I had an assumable mortgage, right? But in any case, you get the point. Residential inventories are starting to creep up. But just put this in context. That other end of the scale over there on the left, that's 2017, 2018, 2019. This is a key problem that we have in what is driving out migration out of our region overall, is that young people cannot find the housing, and we talk about housing affordability. If you talk to the chambers of commerce around the region, and they do their surveys, but concerned business people, number one concern time and time again now is cost of housing, because it's impacting your ability to attract and retain workers, particularly younger workers. And if we don't fix housing costs, and there's lots of things that you can talk about housing costs, and I can list you 40 or 50 things that all impact it one way or another. But the number one is basic economics. If you don't build houses, they're going to cost more money. There's a famous Harvard economist that said, well, thank you, ma'am, appreciate that. There's a Harvard economist that says, no housing, no people, no jobs. If you need jobs to provide the tax base you want to operate your government, you better be building some housing for people to be in. And you can't get stuck, and you can't, they don't allow us to build moats around neighborhoods as much as some of our residents want. The moat with the drawbridge, right? Because once I arrive, nothing else should be drawn. Of course, the other one that I like, used to see this in Texas a lot. So outer ring suburbs, somebody saves up for years, and they finally, instead of having the 1/6 of an acre lot, they have bought a house on a half-acre lot, or maybe even an acre lot. But when they do that, they want to control the vistas as if they just bought the King Ranch. And you get 20 of them all in the same neighborhood together, and they're the ones that means that your planning commission meetings last until 2 a.m. And the later people get, it seems like the less intelligent they get when they're making their decisions. I'm sorry, no, I don't mean any insult on that. Let's just say you're tired, right? What's really interesting, of course, is also those median days in markets, saying, oh, the number, and we're seeing this actually in the press now. Oh, the days on market have doubled. Yeah, they've gone from 7 to 12, from 7 to 17, okay? Remember that days on market, considered a balance in the rest of the world, is about a 4-month inventory, right? I don't think we've ever seen 4 months, by the way. I don't know any place in history. Lisa Sturman from Pride MLS and I have talked about this, and we think that our balance is probably closer to about 2 months. But if you think about that, how far are we away from 2 months of inventory in any of our markets? And of course, the price keeps going up. Now, you can look and see how that, Caroline County is obviously the favorite place to be. They just, it's just the folks that don't realize how good it is yet, right? But still, it's these opportunities. And if I compare these numbers, of course, to our brethren to the north, where I moved out of, you're still talking about $200,000, $250,000 cheaper, right? It's much more family affordable. So, you have some opportunities. And now comes the part where I get to have fun. I'm going to just call this doing development better. And yes, sir, I'm ready to dodge if you want to throw any pieces of food. Or, we were wondering about what you had on the table back there that was actually could be harmful if thrown at the right velocity. This thing that we have in Montgomery County, Maryland, where they have the agricultural reserve zone, it's not like they're producing any agricultural products there. One of my colleagues, in fact, my assistant director, lives in Tacoma Park, and he said, Tacoma Park's a suburb. It's not dense urban. If you took Tacoma Park density and put it in Montgomery County's agricultural reserve zone, you could build over 200,000 housing units. You could basically solve the housing supply crisis one. Now, they don't have any intent of it, and even good friends of ours that have ever even hinted at that can become socially ostracized in a moment. But, and of course, and we see all that stuff, some numbers that I recently saw that somebody pulled up about Prince William County's rural present, what have they, the old idea was, make things accessible, do this, preserve this. All they've done, really, is you now have a lot more, 10-acre parcels than 200-acre parcels. It's just been divvied up into little hobby farms that don't produce anything, have no access, it's all private property. You can't stop, you stop someplace on the side of the road, and if you go 15 feet away from your car, you're trespassing. So, these kind of things where people get in this mind that we can stop. We don't want to see anything here. We want this to look just like it did when our grandfathers were around. It just doesn't work in the long term. Rethink proffers. Until I got here, I had no idea what a proffer was. I've spent my career in Texas and doing work in the South and other places. It's not that we don't have impact fees down there, and not that you don't have other things that say do this, but this notion that company or that a community gets to basically extort anybody from wanting to build. I'm sorry, I use that word intentionally, but just say, oh, you want to come do business with us? Here's all the things you need to do for us. And what that points more than anything is a true attitudinal problem that we have. There is no company in any industry, including federal contracting, that has to locate in any of our communities. Dallas, Texas, for example, has been adding 100,000 jobs per year for well over a decade. It's just a matter that you work with it. It's not saying that a developer or a business wanting to come in shouldn't contribute to the cost of providing services and do some things, but this notion that we can assuage our social guilt and say, well, you got to provide all the funding for the low-income housing. If your community wants to subsidize low-income housing, you build it into the tax structure. I'm getting ready to dodge behind the penny in a second now. Be competitive by being responsive. All right? Let me just say, how long does it take, and I don't need an answer, I just want you to think about it. How long does it take to get approval through Planning Commission and then into council once somebody comes to you if it's a by rights development? And then if it's not by rights development, you want to change it. How long does it take? Now, I haven't looked at your numbers a lot. I'm still godsmacked by what I see up where I used to live up there, where you're talking about 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. One of the suburbs of Dallas, standard practice, city manager came in and said, if the person making an application doesn't have an answer in 60 days, I want to know why. Didn't say it has to be yes, but time is money. And if you're making somebody just sit, if you give a planning commission 5 bites at the apple, all that's doing is ratcheting up. And what does that mean? The cost of housing. Because here is the key thing. There is a myth out there that is perpetuated and is grasped hold of by many people in our community, that if you assign proffers or if you delay development through all these processes, that the developer pays for it. No, the new residents and new businesses pay for it. It is one of the reasons why housing costs more here than it does elsewhere. Full stop. If you want to retain workers because they can afford to live here, you got to figure out ways to make the cost of business lower than what it is. We got to think about incentives. You guys already do that a little bit. Oh my God, Fairfax County is actually thinking about incentives. Of course, now they'll think on it for 5 or 6 years, so it gives you a lot of opportunity, right? But it's, and you can argue against, you read my textbooks, I'll tell you that I really don't like incentives as a notion. I like well-structured tax systems. But it's part of the game. And it's what you do now. You just have to do it. Redevelopment infill, that balance of development, and here's the thing, and this gets there's a couple of points in here, it actually gets that last point, and the balance is, do your analysis. Don't let Planning Commission impose a new rule or a new policy, and you on the councils don't, unless you've actually analyzed the data, and you know how much it's going to cost and who's going to have to pay for it. What's the benefit of it? What's your balance? You don't want to have nothing but industrial development, but you want utility if you haven't put it, above ground enough to where you keep from having soil erosion. Or, the data centers that, hey, by the way, these people they were building hotels, or they were building, they're not experts in the industry that you want. And it doesn't mean that you can't have landowners and other developers that partner with people that know, but vet your people coming to them. And know know that they have the actual capabilities. There's a great story here, somebody that was coming down wanting to do $1 billion+ investment, and their firm had 3 or 4 people. That's pretty risky. But that doesn't mean that the development shouldn't happen, because we have folks that take those bad examples and say, see, we don't need any of that. Well, yeah, you don't need what they represent, but you need some of the rest of it. The other is, remember, Euclidean zoning was developed to protect workers from pollution. Think about, you remember the show Peaky Blinders? Those scenes about starting out in the flames and all the noise and all that kind of stuff? Because in those days in Birmingham, England, you built the housing where somebody commuted, 50 feet to their job. And it was meant to protect that kind of stuff. We need to rethink that kind of thing, because we don't know, with technology change now, we don't know what the future is going to look like 30 years from now. So have flexibility in your planning. The reason I like the thing about form-based codes is that you talk about what do you want your community to feel like? What is the aesthetics of it? And worry less, because we're not going to be building, I'm not saying you couldn't, but you're not worried about building nothing, companies that exude a lot of, pollution onto their next door neighbor. So think about that difference of how you want to shape it. And what I would argue, one of the key challenges for this entity is to start working with your jurisdictions who do their own land use plans to have something that's coordinated. And you think about, where does it make sense? Where do we need to do infill? Where do we need to think of transforming an old strip center into something that has retail at the bottom and some housing on the top for the people that can afford to live there if they're working in those retail centers? The other is patience. You have the advantage, you guys, I tell you what, you operate, most of your communities are in pretty good shape. There are communities elsewhere in the Commonwealth that are not in good financial shape. And of course, but you also look at, we have some communities up north of here that are in a lot worse financial shape than they want you to think they are. It's going to drive some decisions that are going to be really hard for them to take, and it's going to be very hard for their citizens to take. One of the things that I've noticed since I've been here, quite frankly, is that in Northern Virginia, we do collectively love our public services. We just want somebody else to pay for it. And I think that there is a real lesson there in how you think about that. So, all of that being said, I managed to get this far. I need to quit while I'm ahead, not getting things thrown at me. What I would tell you is that you are faced with unprecedented opportunity. And some of that opportunity is this emerging new technologies that are looking for places to grow. I remember when I first got here being chastised by a regional leader that I said something about, well, what's the opportunities for manufacturing? Oh, we don't do that here. And I was looking at scans because Micron had just announced a $3 billion expansion. It's kind of like, okay. But my point is that there is a lot of opportunity there, and some of that opportunity, unfortunately, is going to be because your neighbors to the north just don't seem to, at the moment, have the political will to get over doing the way that they've done things successfully for 40, 50 years. But that is not going to work in the future. So learn from their mistakes, look at different, you can still be different, you don't have to be an Alabama that gives away the store. Remember the old deal with Mercedes? As long as Mercedes been there, the state of Alabama gave them $365,000 per job worth of incentives. You don't have to do that to be successful. But I will tell you what, if I'm working with the company, I'll be happy for you to give me that much money, right? Because it really makes my bottom line easy to make. My point is that you have these opportunities, and what you also have, and I am not pandering to this audience, this regional alliance right now, this group here, represents something that your neighbors to the north don't have. They have a little alliance that they talk and they have drinks and they will cooperate in the background a little bit, but having it to where you guys, business-led economic development at the regional level that works with local government, but also doesn't let local government get, there's competition is fine, but don't get into destructive competition with each other. Because I can point to you communities, you know examples of this, and I can point to you, some company gets $1 million to literally move a half a mile away because it goes from one jurisdiction. Just work among yourselves and keep up there flying high and work collaboratively. And then also think beyond your traditions. What are the industries that are going to grow? Artificial intelligence, quantum, buying stuff because the consumer is still king. Okay, that tells me all that's going to require data storage and logistics. But all of that gets supported by households who are earning good money doing professional and business services. Balance that out, you guys will be in great shape, and it'll be a place that I'll be very comfortable living because, quite honestly, what it boils down to, tax base. If you stop growing, the tax rates will go up. It is inevitable, it is unavoidable. If you want to have an affordable place to live in terms of taxes, you have to grow. All right, with that, any questions? I just stunned you into silence. You didn't care. I'm keeping you from getting back to the bar.
Tell you, I'll stand over here. But if anybody's got any questions, please ask. Or are we so excited we all want to go to the bar?
Well, Dr. Clower, my next planning commission meeting is on November 12th. If you got some time in Stafford. I could use some support from a Stafford citizen.
I've got the time if you've got the Kevlar. It is really interesting. I sat through, and I won't tell you where, a planning commission meeting recently, and it was just all I could do to keep it screaming because it was listening to these folks trying to one-up each other on, oh no, it's not a 100-foot setback, it needs to be a 150-foot setback, oh, it needs to be a 200-foot setback. And this was something that was basic infrastructure, of which, more than anything else, provides services to residents. So, it's just a matter of kind of getting over that. Now, there's also one that the thing about it is the folks that need to hear that most probably aren't here tonight. So it's how do we carry that message out and just say, it's a stark difference. Is your future up here or is your future down here? It's very clear. All right. And with that,
Well, I was just going to say, Terry's given this talk up in Northern Virginia, and the D.C. region, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Fairfax, Princess William, and Loudoun. And it's a very bleak picture up there. If it weren't for the revenue of the data centers over the last 5 years, the GDP would actually be declining, and there is an ex-migration happening. So when Derry was asked to come down here and look at this region, and he was excited about it because of just what he said. This is still a green, this is still a clean slate. You have the opportunity to grow. This is great. Don't make the mistakes that Northern Virginia, that the DC region have done. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'd just say, understand the position that Northern Virginia and these areas are in. You guys remember Jerry Gordon, right? Jerry and I used to have a lot of fun. He was the Economic Development Director for Fairfax County for a quarter of a century or more, right? The thing is, Jerry couldn't have stopped growth if he'd wanted to. It was handed to them. You know, and in part, it's a little bit of off the back of U.S. taxpayers as federal government spending continues to grow and grow without bounds, apparently. But the point is that they haven't had to compete. It hasn't been where they've had to aggressively fight and claw to attract business investment. It's been handed to them. And unfortunately, I think those days are coming to an end. They'll still have some advantages. Cybersecurity and things like that will still be tied a lot to federal standards and federal government, but there's a whole lot of this bit. In fact, one of the things that our data was observing is Silicon Valley has been outperforming on cybersecurity employment for us because they're at the edge of the new technologies out there and spill. So, some of our old traditional advantages have started to slip. You guys are in the position of that next stage out with the ability to shape it and to imagine what you want the economic future of your region to be. I'm just going to tell you, if you decide collectively to try to be what you were in the past, it doesn't. It never stays in the past. All right? The past is dead. It's gone. What are you going to be in the future? And you can be something to where it'll be great. There will be resources. You won't be constrained. You won't have, like we see, where you can't attract teachers because you can't pay them, where you have school buildings that are falling apart because you don't have the tax base, to where you have multi-billion-dollar deficits on the pensions of your public servant workers. So you have those opportunities. And to the extent that my center, we love doing this kind of work. We love talking to groups. We love providing data to help you guys make better decisions. So if there's anything we can do for you, please always feel free to reach out. You have great resources here within the region. We bring in folks from around the country and indeed around the world. So happy to always be of service. And of course, every now and then I get to come talk to the folks in my home county, which is always fun. So in any case, thank you very much for your attention this evening. It's very, very kind.
I should have brought you one of my favorite sweatshirts. The mayor's over here grinning at me, but one of my favorite sweatshirts that I saw when I first came here to work was at the, the Celtic store, Irish store, down on Caroline. It's Fredericksburg, a drinking town with a history problem. And it would make a perfect bumper sticker. Terry, thank you for coming. The bar's still open. Thank you all for attending, and I'm sure Terry would be happy to chat with any of you. Thank you.